Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we cut through the noise and deliver the core insights from a massive stack of complex research, all custom-built just for you. So when we try to make sense of the world's economies, why some nations are rich and stable while others struggle, we almost always start with this really simple frame.
Capitalism versus socialism.
Exactly. Free markets on one side, central planning on the other. We see them as, well, complete opposites.
But that simple opposition, it's really misleading if you look at how things actually work.
Right, because every single country, from the U.S. all the way to China, runs what is technically a mixed economy. They all exist somewhere on a spectrum.
The most, fiercely capitalist nation still has huge government systems.
So here's the pivot we need to make. If pretty much every economy is a mix, why are the outcomes, the growth, the stability, the equality, so drastically different from one place to another?
And that's our mission today. To unpack that, the answer isn't if you mix private and public, but in the institutional how.
The DNA of the system.
Precisely. We're going to dive into two profound, historically rooted, and often overlooked institutional forces: legal origins and political systems. These are the things that influence everything from investor protection all the way to national wealth disparity. So, okay, let's get into it.
Let's do it. But first, let's just quickly set a baseline so we're all on the same page with those, core theoretical ideas.
Absolutely. So at one theoretical extreme, you have capitalism. It's based on private ownership of the means of production, factories, tools, that kind of thing. And it's operated for profit.
And everything is driven by competitive markets where private property is key, and the government's supposed to keep its hands off.
Right. The upside is innovation and growth. The critique, of course, is that it can lead to massive inequality.
And then on the other end, the flip side, is pure socialism.
Which is based on collective or public ownership. Here, production is meant to directly satisfy human needs, to increase equality, not just chase profit.
And the mechanisms there are things like central planning and the state owning major industries.
Yep. The goal is equality, but the common criticism is a potential lack of efficiency.
But again, here's the big aha moment for a lot of people. Those are just the poles on a magnet. No modern economy is actually at either extreme.
None. They are all mixed economies. And, even in the U.S., which is often held up as the global icon of capitalism, the state plays this absolutely massive role, and it uses principles that are, fundamentally socialist.
That's such a key point. You look at the U.S. and you see Social Security. That's centralized social insurance, or Medicare.
Federal health insurance, yeah.
Public schools, the entire interstate highway system, even the FDIC, the government insuring your bank deposits. These are all collective actions for social welfare.
It's all about the balance. And just for clarity, we should probably mention that communism is distinct from this. It's more of a philosophical end state, a classless society, communal ownership of everything, and eventually the state just disappears.
Right. We're not talking about that today. We're in the messy, mixed middle.
And that's where things get interesting. Because just looking at the ratio of private to public doesn't explain much. You have to look underneath at the structural scaffolding.
The invisible hand of legal history. This is where it gets really interesting. Legal origins theory.
This theory has been, hugely influential in economics for the past couple of decades. It basically says that a country's economic rules are rooted in these deep, inherited legal traditions.
Usually transplanted through colonization or conquest, right?
Exactly. And this legal origin shapes the whole philosophy of how the state should interact with the market.
And the research really zeroes in on two big ones. Common law from England and French civil law, which goes back to Roman law. So what is the core philosophical split between them?
The difference is really strategic. Common law is fundamentally dispute resolving. Its main focus is to support what researchers call unconditioned private contracting.
Okay, hold on. Unconditioned private contracting. What does that actually mean for an average person or a business owner?
It means the system is built to let two private parties write a contract with as much freedom as possible. The state doesn't automatically inject a ton of social conditions into your agreement.
So the state's job is just to enforce the contract if there's a problem.
Exactly, to resolve the dispute. It's not trying to pre-write the terms for you. And that's why judges' decisions create precedents, case law that evolves over time.
Got it. So if common law is about resolving disputes, what's the focus for the French civil law system?
French civil law is policy implementing. The whole system is designed to allow the state to replace market outcomes with what it calls state-desired allocations.
So socially conditioned private contracting, The state is an active player from the start.
Yes, it relies on these comprehensive written codes that are supposed to cover every possibility. The judge is more like a bureaucrat who just interprets that code. They don't set new precedents.
Wow, the idea that the law is there to implement policy instead of just resolving disputes feels like it would change everything about an economy. So what are the measurable impacts of these two different operating systems?
They're pervasive. I mean, let's just start with finance. Countries with French civil law origins consistently show lower shareholder and creditor protection.
Which makes it harder to get private investment.
And debt enforcement is less efficient. Compare that to common law countries. The difference in investor protection has huge real-world consequences for capital.
Yeah, I can imagine. Money flows where it feels safe.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And one key study found that in civil law countries, government ownership of banks is significantly higher, something like 33 percentage points higher.
So capital is concentrated in the state's hands.
Yes, and it's directed by the state rather than flowing through deep private financial markets. The legal style literally shapes who gets the money.
What about regulation outside of finance? Does the pattern hold?
It does. French civil law is associated with a much heavier hand of government regulation across the board. You see much higher barriers to entry.
Meaning more paperwork, more permits, more time to just open a small business?
Exactly. And we also see heavier government involvement in labor laws.
There was also a really surprising link in the sources about this, connecting legal style to state control over, well, your life. Right.
Yeah, civil law origins correlate with higher state ownership of the media and a much heavier reliance on mandatory military conscription.
And economists see conscription as the ultimate government intervention in the labor market.
It is. It reinforces that core idea. Civil law traditions are built on the state's right to command private resources and private labor for what it sees as the national good.
That is fascinating. So the difference isn't just a political choice someone made yesterday. It's a strategic preference baked into the system for centuries.
Absolutely. And you even see it in the judicial process itself. Civil law countries tend to show greater judicial formalism.
Okay, another term. What does judicial formalism look like in real life?
It means that even though the laws are all written down, the actual process of enforcing them can be really slow and rigid. For example, the time it takes to enforce a contract, like, say, to collect on a bounce check, is systematically slower in these systems.
And the judges have less independence.
Often, yes. Their role is seen more as an administrator interpreting the code, not as a powerful check on the government.
So, to sum this up, common law's toolkit is all about supporting markets. Things like disclosure rules for stocks to keep things fair.
Right, to sustain the market.
While civil law's toolkit is ready to use direct state control, or even nationalization, to just replace the market entirely if there's a crisis.
It's a perfect summary. Common law aims to sustain markets. Civil law is philosophically prepared to replace them.
Okay, that covers the legal foundation, the deep-seated rules of the game. But rules need an enforcer. So let's turn to the second major force, the political structure.
Right, we're moving from the judicial architecture to the actual governmental operating system. This is where we look at the difference between presidential and parliamentary systems.
And the data here is, well, it's pretty shocking.
It's exceptionally strong. Presidential regimes consistently underperform parliamentary ones when it comes to the economy.
How badly?
We're talking GDP growth rates that are somewhere between 0.6 and 1.2 percentage points lower. And I mean, even a 0.5% difference compounded over decades creates a massive wealth gap.
And what do the actual wealth figures look like?
They're stark. If you look back at 1960, the median real GDP per capita in parliamentary countries was about $6,000. In presidential countries, it was just over $1,400.
So the average parliamentary country was more than 4 times wealthier.
4.39 times wealthier, to be exact. And you'd think maybe that gap would close over time with globalization.
But it didn't.
It got wider. By 2019, the disparity had widened to 4.74 times. And on top of that, income inequality is significantly worse, about 16 to 20% more unequal in presidential countries.
Just because of the form of government. How can that be responsible for such a huge, persistent gap? What is it about the presidential system that hurts growth so much?
It really boils down to institutional quality and stability. In a parliamentary system, like in Canada or the UK, The executive leader has to come from the legislature.
which forces them to build coalitions.
It forces coalition building, consensus, a distribution of power, and that consensus-driven approach tends to lead to more effective government, better regulation, and longer, more stable democracies.
Whereas a presidential system, because it separates the executive and the legislature, almost sets them up for a fight.
That's exactly it. Presidential systems, think of examples like Turkey or Brazil, can lead to a winner-takes-all political environment.
All the power gets concentrated in one office.
And that leads to political volatility and, crucially for the economy, crippling policy discontinuity.
And that discontinuity is the real killer for investment, isn't it? And you can see this interplay in these fascinating real-world hybrids. Like the U.S., it's the absolute epitome of the market-supporting common law tradition. But it operates under a presidential system, a political structure that statistically tends to drag on growth. It's an institutional contradiction.
And then you have the successful Nordic countries, Sweden, Denmark. People call them socialists, but that's not really accurate. They have huge welfare states, sure. But they also have tons of private ownership and rank really high on economic freedom.
And they're parliamentary systems running under a more flexible legal code.
Exactly. They show you can have high welfare and high market freedom if the governance structure is stable.
And then there's China, the ultimate hybrid. Officially socialist, but running this massive experiment in state-led capitalism under a civil law system.
Right. The state controls the big strategic sectors, but lets the private sector rip elsewhere. And that state-directed model, backed by that policy-implementing legal tradition, has produced, unprecedented growth.
So the key takeaway here is that the real debate is way more sophisticated than just ideology. It's about tweaking the balance between the market and the state within these hardwired constraints that are incredibly resistant to change.
That's it. We've seen that legal origins theory points to this inherent strategic difference. Common law systems try to shore up markets, while civil law systems are designed to be able to replace them.
And we've established that the political structure, parliamentary versus presidential, is a huge factor in the stability and growth that follows.
So given that the global economy has moved so sharply towards markets and capitalism in recent decades, favoring that market-supporting common law style, it leads us to a final provocative question for you to chew on.
Let's hear it.
Which form of this mixed capitalism will ultimately prevail in the long run? Will it be the market-focused, litigation-driven Anglo-Saxon capitalism we see in the US and UK? Or will it be the more state-centered capitalism, the civil law, or East Asian style, which values control and stability?
And the answer might depend on what comes next.
It might. Which system will prove superior when the next major global financial or climate crisis inevitably hits and demands massive coordinated state action? The fate of the global economy might depend less on rhetoric and more on which inherited institutional style handles crisis best.
Something to think about until our next deep dive.